felt like I was waking from a dream I couldn't remember. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I was in a white, sterile room, and there were shadowy figures all around me, slowly morphing from shadows into human shapes. My first thought was that this was another dream, a nightmare, except I didn't feel like I was asleep anymore. My brain was foggy, but through my haze, I realized that the people standing around me wore surgical scrubs and masks. I attempted to lift my head, but nothing happened. I opened my mouth to speak, but there was something in my throat and around my face. I began to panic. My body wanted to thrash wildly, but not a muscle moved. What had happened? Had I been kidnapped and forced to be a subject in some strange experiment? The figures around me were speaking, and I tried to make myself focus, but the terror was growing. The room was full of antiseptic smells and beeping machines. Then the shadowy figure closest to me said, "Scalpel, please." That's when I realized what was happening. I'd been brought in for surgery that morning to correct a congenital heart defect that was causing overcirculation in my body. I'd been terrified about the surgery for months, but it was a medical necessity. One of the last things my mother had said to me before the doctors took me back was, "Sarah, don't worry, you won't feel a thing." But I could feel everything. The cool air in the room, the pressure of the breathing tube in my mouth, the surgeon's hands as she swabbed an area of my chest. Even my eyes weren't under my control. Sometimes it felt like they were blinking rapidly. Sometimes they felt dry and scratchy, like I wasn't blinking at all. I kept trying to move any part of my body. Fingers, toes, nothing worked. The procedure had been explained to me ahead of time. They would give me a paralytic as part of the general anesthesia, so my body wouldn't be able to move reflexively on the operating table, but I'd be unconscious and wouldn't feel anything. But somehow, I had woken up. The paralytic had worked, but the anesthesia hadn't. I watched the surgeon come closer to me with a scalpel. I tried to open my mouth, but it was like every muscle in my body was made of lead. "Stop!" I tried with all my might to tell her. "Stop! I'm awake!" But there was nothing I could do but lie there, completely helpless. I felt a slight pressure on my chest, no pain at first. The blade of the scalpel was so thin, it barely felt like anything. And then I could feel a sharp pain in my chest. I was sure I was dying. I had never felt pain that excruciating in my life. The sides of my chest hurt, and every scream I wanted to let out was silent. Then the surgeon used the other surgical tools. Each one felt different, but they all hurt. The smell of the room was terrible. Actually, I felt more pressure and pain as they began to explore my internal organs. Well, it was less painful once they were touching inside my body, but the pressure, the sensation of my individual organs being moved was terrible. I was sure I was going to throw up. That's when some survival instinct kicked in. You can't throw up, I told myself. If you throw up, you'll choke and you'll die. I concentrated on staying calm. I tried to think about my friends, about school, about anything except what was happening to my body. But the sensation of the surgeon's hands as she touched my heart made it impossible to stay calm. It was like something out of a horror movie. I wanted to scream at them to stop. I wanted to scream for my mother. I wanted to scream and never stop screaming. And then I realized that part of the pressure that I felt in my chest wasn't just the surgeon's hands. It was the breathing tube, which was only giving me one breath every couple of minutes. It felt like there was a giant dog sitting on my open chest. I couldn't get air into my lungs, and I was afraid that even if I could breathe the way I wanted to, breathing would make the excruciating pain even worse. I had to make my body move. I had to find a way around the paralytic to let the doctors know that I was awake and feeling everything. I concentrated as hard as I could, but each time I felt close to moving, the surgeon's hands would shift inside me and a new wave of panic and pain would hit me. Finally, I managed to twitch my hand. At least I thought I did. At that point, I couldn't tell if I was just imagining it or not. Then I felt a hand on mine, and I almost passed out with relief. It was the assistant, and if she'd seen my hand move, then maybe she'd realize what was happening. The breathing tube gave me another breath. I drank that air gratefully, hoping my ordeal was about to be over. Then I realized that the assistant was holding my hand in place, not reassuring or helping me. I heard her say to the surgeon, "This one's a little jumpy." and they both laughed. I had never felt such overwhelming despair and terror in my whole life. I was going to die here, and I was going to die in terrible pain. I didn't realize it was about to get worse. One of my eyelids was forced down and taped in place. Half of my world went black, then the other half. Now I couldn't see the surgeons, couldn't tell when they were about to touch me or cut me. The machines around me started beeping, and I felt a terrible chill, like someone had dumped ice into my open chest. My body began to shiver, but I didn't know if the muscles were really working or if I was just imagining it. My lungs were slowly being crushed by lack of air, and I couldn't feel anything but fear. I silently said my last goodbyes to my friends and family. Then, something strange happened. It was like I left my body and floated up to the ceiling. My eyes were open again, and I could see myself down there on the table. Could see my open chest and the mess of organs inside me. The tape over my eyelids, that horrible breathing tube down my throat. I could see the surgeon and her assistant still joking with each other. Had I died? Was I on my way to the afterlife? I didn't feel scared anymore, and luckily I couldn't feel pain. But what hit me now was a flood of memories, like when people say your life flashes before your eyes as you're about to die. The first face I saw was my mom's. I remembered those awful few months leading up to the surgery. I had been so scared that the surgery wouldn't work, that I would die on the table or afterward from a heart complication. My anxiety had me terrible to be around. I was mean to everyone. I never did what was expected of me at school or at home, and nobody even tried to make me because they knew I was sick. My mom was the only person who pushed me, who made me do my homework and study for college admissions tests and do my chores, as though she truly believed I was going to have a long, full life. But there was no guarantee, and because of that fear, I took all of my anger out on her. By the time the day of the surgery rolled around, we were barely speaking to each other. But in the waiting room, when I'd been shaking with terror, she had looked at me and told me everything would be all right, that I wouldn't feel a thing, that she would see me on the other side. I'd wanted to tell her that I loved her, but I was too afraid and angry, irrationally angry, as though she was the one who was making me do this. The nurse had taken me back to the operating room before I could get the words out. Remembering that now, I knew that I had to live. I had to live so that I could tell her I loved her and that I was sorry. I looked down at my body lying on that table, and I concentrated with all my might. Move your hand, I told myself. You have to move your hand. It wasn't working. I saw the body on the table as though from a great distance. I could sort of remember what it felt like to struggle to breathe, to feel the scalpel ripping into my body, but all of that was slowly fading. It would be so easy to just keep floating. Then my hand twitched. Once, twice, 3 times. The machine started beeping again. Suddenly, I slammed back into my body on the table. The pain was back, the struggle to breathe, but I didn't care anymore. All that mattered was living through this. An assistant was removing my breathing tube. The beeping of the machines was a cacophony that hurt my head. I could hear people saying, "She's awake and we have to get her back under." They had figured it out. Someone was talking to me, saying my name, telling me to try to stay calm, that I would sleep in a moment. I was still terrified. What if the anesthesia didn't work again? Or what if I did go back to sleep, but I never woke up? Blackness edged my vision again, but this time I let it take me. When I woke up again, everything was fuzzy. It took me a moment to realize where I was, and when I did, I panicked, thrashing on the bed, afraid that I was still being cut into. A nurse came and calmed me down, and then a surgeon came in. I was awake, I told her. I felt everything. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said how sorry she was that this happened to me. She said it was very, very rare and that I was one of the unlucky ones. I didn't know what else to say. In some ways, I did feel like one of the unlucky ones, but at the same time, I was incredibly lucky to have survived. Tears welled in my eyes, then started sliding down my cheeks. I felt so confused and afraid until a face appeared in the doorway. The one face that I desperately wanted to see. My mom. She hurried to my bedside and asked me what had happened. I just held onto her and told her that I loved her and was sorry for all the times that I'd hurt her. She said it was okay, that none of that mattered, that she loved me so much. Then I took a deep breath and started to tell her what I experienced. The recovery from the surgery was long, but I'm doing okay now. I still have PTSD from my ordeal. Some nights I wake up in a panic, thinking I can't move, that I'm back on the operating table with a scalpel about to slice me open. Sometimes my body won't move or my voice won't work, even though I'm not under the influence of a paralytic. It's like the memories are so strong, they can freeze up my body again. But my mom has been wonderful through it all, helping me through it. I realize now how grateful I should have been for her all along. After all, it was her strength that gave me the strength to survive.
I could hear the raised voices as I walked down my street. Surely, that couldn't be coming from my house. My mom and dad never argued. But as I got closer, I realized that it was my mom and dad. I wondered what could have happened to make them fight like that. I opened the front door, and the shouting hit me like a ton of bricks. You betrayed me. No, it was you who betrayed me. I hate you. I never want to see you again. That was my mom. Why would she say something like that to my dad? I wondered what he could have done. Don't worry, I'm out of here, shouted Dad. Do you really think I want to spend another minute of my time with someone like you? This couldn't be happening. What's going on? I asked. Mom and Dad looked around in surprise. They hadn't realized I had been standing there, listening to everything they said. Dad barged past me and out the front door, slamming it behind him as he went. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more crazy stories. I couldn't understand why there had been fighting. I always thought they were so in love, the perfect couple. But I guess they hadn't been as happy as I thought, because the following day my dad packed up all those things and left our house for good. He got an apartment on the other side of town. He told me that he wanted me to go and live with him there, but Mom also wanted me to live with her. I tried to ask them both what had happened to make them fight, but they were both really vague. I don't know if they were trying to protect me or if they thought I wouldn't understand. Mom just said things hadn't been going well for a while, and my dad said they had drifted apart. It didn't seem like a good enough reason to get divorced, but I suppose they knew what they were doing. They told me that by the end of the week, I would have to decide which one of them I was going to live with. It wasn't an easy decision. My dad just kept on showering me with presents. In the following couple of days, he literally bought me everything I'd asked for in the last few months. I knew he was trying to buy me, but it was hard to resist. My mom, on the other hand, just tried to guilt trip me into staying with her. You wouldn't leave me, darling, would you? Not after everything I have done for you, she said. Remember, I carried you in my tummy for 9 months. I fed you, bathed you, read you stories, whilst all your father did was go to work. It was too difficult. How on earth could I choose between one parent or another? I decided the only thing for it was to flip a coin. So that's what I did. Heads up, I stay with my mom. Tails, I go live with my dad. I flipped the coin in the air. I watched as it turned over and over as it tumbled back down. I caught it on the back of my hand. It was heads. So I stayed at home with my mom. Dad was really upset when I told him my decision. I promise I will come and see you as often as I can, I told him. I really missed my dad. We used to spend every evening together, watching TV or out in the garden if the weather was nice. Now I just sat in my room, alone in front of my computer. Mom was always busy doing something. She said that she didn't have time to laze around all night in front of the television. I couldn't wait for the weekend so that I could go and see my dad. When the school bell rang to say it was the end of the day, I ran out of the school gates. I could see my dad's car parked at the end of the road. I jumped in and gave Dad a big hug. I've missed you so much, I said. And I've missed you too, Bella, said Dad. I've got a really special weekend planned for us. That night we ordered pizza and sat together watching TV. It was a perfect way to spend a Friday night. The next day, Dad took me into town to go shopping. Then we went to see a movie. The weekend went by so quickly. Before I knew it, it was time for Dad to drop me back to my mom's house. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had no choice. The week seemed to drag by, but eventually it was Thursday night. The next day, I would be going to see my dad again. I was sitting in my room wondering what my dad would have planned for us to do that weekend when I heard a loud knock at the door. I wondered who could be coming to our house at that time of night. I went downstairs and was surprised to see 2 policemen standing in our hallway. What's happened, Mom? I asked. Mom looked at me. Apparently your dad has been involved in some sort of incident, she said. What do you mean? Someone has attempted to murder him. The blood drained from my face. Is he going to be okay? I'm sorry, said the policeman. We don't have any more details at the moment. We will take you to the hospital now so that you can see your dad. I got in the police car and we drove to the hospital. When I got there, Dad was laid in bed. He was covered in bandages. Dad, are you okay? I cried as I ran to his bedside. He has been sedated, said his doctor. We need him to rest to recover from his injuries. What happened to him? The doctor told me that someone had stabbed my dad. He had been injured quite badly, but they felt sure he would make it. Luckily, his wounds weren't too deep. I couldn't understand who would want to do this to my dad. He was such a kind man. He didn't have any enemies. I called Mom and told her that Dad was going to be fine. I'm going to go over to his apartment before I come home, I said. I just want to make sure everything is okay there. Okay, Bella, be careful, Mom said. When I got to Dad's apartment, everything looked normal. There was no sign of a break-in or anything. I went inside. The apartment looked exactly the same as when I left it last week. Nothing out of place. It just didn't make sense to me. I was about to leave when I suddenly spotted something on the floor. It was a gemstone, a round red ruby. I wondered where it could have come from. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. I decided I would ask Dad about it when he woke up. I locked the door and went back home to my mom's. I thought that she would show a little concern about Dad, but it seemed like she didn't care at all. When I went into the kitchen, she didn't ask a thing. She just carried on stirring the pot on the stove. Dinner will be ready soon, Bella, she said. Go get a shower and come straight down. I did as Mom told me. I couldn't believe she was being so heartless. Even though they were getting a divorce now, she must have loved him at one point. After my shower, I went and sat at the dining room table. Mom came in with a steaming bowl in her hands. That's when I saw it. The necklace Mom was wearing was missing a stone. There was a big hole where once there had been a bright red ruby. I knew I had to confront her. I pulled the ruby out of my pocket. Mom, is this yours? I asked her. Oh, thank you, darling, she said. I've been looking for that everywhere. Where did you find it? In Dad's apartment. Mom looked at me and I realized I knew what she had done. She was the one who tried to murder my dad. Why did you want to hurt Dad? I asked her. Your dad is a spy for the British government, she said. He's been trying to get secrets out of me because I work for the United States government. I had to silence him. That's why I did it. You're not going to tell anyone, are you? You wouldn't put your own mother in prison, would you? This is crazy, I thought. I'm going to see Dad, I shouted. I need to hear what he has to say. I ran out of the house and went straight to the hospital. Dad was sitting up in bed. He looked really happy to see me. I know you're a spy, I shouted at him. He looked shocked. Who told you that? He asked. Mom told me. I know all about you trying to get secrets out of her. Well, did she also tell you that she is a Russian spy? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did my dad think I was stupid? Mom's not from Russia. She's from Texas, I said. Oh, that's just the fake identity she made for herself. She has perfected the Texas accent to fool everyone. But what about my grandparents? I asked him. They live in Texas. We have stayed there so many times. Dad told me that my mom had hired these people to pretend to be my grandparents, to fool us into believing that she was really from Texas. Wait, so are you both spies then? I asked Dad. No, only your mom. I didn't know who to believe. It was crazy. I thought I had two normal parents, and now they were both saying that the other was a spy. I didn't know which one I could trust, but seeing as my dad was the one who was in the hospital, I guess that I had to believe him. I went back to Mom's and packed up all my things. I'm going to live with Dad, I told her. You won't tell anyone, right? She said. You won't get me sent to prison, will you? I shook my head. I didn't like what she had done, but she was still my mom. I won't tell anyone as long as you leave me and Dad alone now. Mom agreed, and I went to live with my dad. It was a couple of weeks later when I heard a car pull up outside my dad's apartment. I looked out of the window. It was a police car, and two policemen were walking towards our door. My heart dropped. I wondered what they were coming for. Before they had a chance to knock, I opened the door. Hello, Bella, one of the policemen said. Can we come in? I took them into the lounge and we sat on the sofa. That's when they told me the most shocking thing. Someone has attempted to murder your mom, they said. First my dad, now my mom? I thought. Is she okay? I asked. Yes, she's fine, but we just wanted to ask if you had any idea who might do this to her. I told the policeman that I didn't know anything. As soon as they drove off, I put on my coat and set off to my mom's house. I was determined I would find out who had done this to her. I thought that as she was a spy, maybe she got into trouble with some bad people. But when I got to my mom's house, I saw something I wasn't expecting. On the floor was a handkerchief. I picked it up. I would recognize it anywhere. It had my dad's initials embroidered in one corner. I felt more confused than ever. I wondered if my mom had been telling the truth all along. Had it actually been my dad that was the spy? I decided that the only way to find out the truth was to get them both together and force them to tell me. That's when I came up with my plan. It all took place later that night. I snuck up on my dad while he was in the living room and hit him over the head. I blindfolded my mom while she was sleeping and dragged them both down to the basement and tied them both to a chair. Oh, and if you're wondering how I managed to kidnap 2 spies, I'm a master in karate. I've studied it for more than 10 years. I guess that is one good thing my parents did for me. It took a while for my dad to come around from the bash on his head, but eventually he opened his eyes. I took off my mom's blindfold. They both looked in surprise at each other. "You tell me the truth right now," I screamed at them. "I want to know which one of you is really a spy." My parents looked at each other and nodded. "We are both spies," they said. My jaw dropped. Seriously? So now I'm in a dilemma. Do I report my mom for attempting to kill my dad? Or do I report my dad for doing the same thing to her? It's the hardest decision of my life. I have to choose between my mom and my dad.